Welcome into the Action Network podcast presented by the FanDuel Sportsbook. I'm your host today, Brendan Glasheen. Today is our annual NFL Breakout Candidates episode with Action Network alum. He's a friend of the podcast, NFL expert at Fantasy Life, Matthew Friedman. We also have our own Chris Raybon joining today's episode. We're highlighting a handful of under-the-radar players as we look to identify a few guys who could see dramatic increases in performance this coming NFL season. It's right around the corner. It's here. Preseason football started up last week, so we're excited to have Friedman here and Raybon to chime in as well. Let's dive right in. We're going to go player by player. It turns out this first breakout candidate, Friedman, is at the quarterback position. Why don't you tell us who your first breakout candidate for 2023 is?
Yeah, I'm cheating because this guy isn't under the radar, but I'm saying Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback for the Dolphins. And how I'm framing the breakout is that everyone knows that he was like good last year, but they sort of like contextualize it like, oh, he was good, but ... It had to do with the wide receivers. It had to do with the offensive system. He, didn't play the full season. He might retire. So there's all this contextualization around him. And I think people don't fully appreciate, like, Tua was awesome. He actually had like an MVP-esque type of season last year. Like if you actually just look at all of the MVPs who've won the award in the past decade, all quarterbacks, you look at Aaron Rodgers 3 times, Patrick Mahomes twice, Tom Brady, Matt Ryan, Peyton Manning, and then the 2 runners, Lamar Jackson and Cam Newton. What all of those guys have in common is that either they are, I would say, like paradigm shifting runners at the quarterback position, or they are highly efficient when they win the MVP, and efficient in one of 2 metrics, like 2 nerdy metrics: adjusted yards per attempt, or the composite of expected points added and completion percentage over expectation. Every MVP winner, with the exception of Jackson and Cam Newton, who are kind of their own different thing, all of those guys were number 1 or number 2 in one of those metrics. And last year, Tua was top 2 in both of those metrics, just like Patrick Mahomes. Now, like, obviously they're different types of quarterbacks, but I don't think people fully appreciate how awesome Tua is. And he's still available at 22-1 in the MVP market, but people just don't give him the respect he deserves. I kind of don't know why. He was awesome at Alabama. He was the number 5 pick in the draft 3 years ago. Like, people should be talking about him in that like Burrow, Herbert type of conversation, but they're not. And I think this is the year that he elevates himself into that tier.
All right. Health, of course, matters. Last year, tossed 3,600 yards. His passing yards prop is set at 3,800 and a half over at FanDuel. And to your point, you got to shop around here. MVP odds at FanDuel down to 16-1. So that number has dropped a little bit for Tua going up against a really talented quarterback pool in the AFC. Raybon, you've got a quarterback as a breakout candidate, but it's over in the other conference.
Yeah, and this guy was nowhere near as efficient as Tua last year, but he does kind of fit the mold of what Friedman was talking about with the 2 guys who have won the MVP at quarterback who weren't, these uber efficient throwers, added a lot with their running game and their legs, and that's Justin Fields. I think Justin Fields is going to make the jump this year. I think he's going to follow the Josh Allen trajectory, the Jalen Hurts trajectory, because you look at, adding DJ Moore this offseason, but still being able to go now to the second year in the system. So it's not like he's, just getting a new receiver and he has to learn everything else. It's really going to be more about kind of shoring up things from last year. I don't think he's going to have to scramble quite as much, but he's still one of the most electric, if not the most electric scramblers in the league anyway. And when you look at how did he struggle? Well, his yards per attempt was right around 7 for his career. That's around league average, but his completion percentage is only 60%. But now that you have DJ Moore, Claypool sounds like he's doing well. You got Mooney coming back. Cole Kmet has played himself into a big second contract already. And I think the line is going to be better as well. So you're going to have a lot more pieces in place for Justin Fields this year to really put up big numbers. And I think he's going to kind of be the surprise of people that I don't think Justin Fields is going to be in the passing game for Chicago is going to be a net negative anymore. I think you're going to start seeing Justin Fields in that passing game start to win Chicago some games. And I still think their defense is going to be, below average. So he's going to need to show the stuff to keep him in games. But they're in a weak division where Green Bay's in transition. Detroit might be a little overhyped, and Minnesota was a fraud last year. And might have gotten worse outside of Brian Flores, who I love. But just personnel wise, Minnesota might have gotten worse. So there is a chance that Chicago wins this division and like backs into 9 or 10 wins just because of the playing a last place schedule and being in a weak division. So I think Justin Fields is going to really take that next step this year.
Yeah. So you expect improvement in the passing game. Do you anticipate the same production on the ground? Last year, about 1,200 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns.
Absolutely not. That's a ridiculous outlier, but I still expect he'll be able to scramble when he needs to. But I think you're going to start to see some of that rushing yardage replaced with pass attempts and dropbacks, because we even saw that over the, I would say, second half of Justin Fields this season. I know it ended a few games early, but over those first 5 or 6 games, he was only dropping back to pass 15, 18 times in some of those games. And over the second half, you started to see those numbers normalize a bit more. The pass attempts didn't grow as high as you might think because he still had a sack problem. But that's why I say the O-line will be better. And receivers getting open also helps a quarterback take less sacks, because the quicker a guy breaks free or the less double, triple clutch a quarterback has to do because nobody's open, the better he can get rid of the ball. So I think you're just going to kind of see all of these factors coalesce. You're going to see better passing numbers. You'll still see rushing efficiency. But if you're seeing 1,200 yards from Fields on the ground again, that's probably not going to be a fully successful season for him to break out.
Okay. Thanks for partaking in that follow-up question, Raybon. I really appreciate it.
Always a
pleasure. Friedman, let's go to your second breakout candidate. This time you're going on defense, and the Philadelphia Eagles, they have loved the Georgia program, and you're going to one of their Georgia Bulldogs at linebacker.
Yeah, I knew Raybon would come in here with all 5 offensive players, skill position players. So I felt the need to add some variety to the program. That's what I bring to the show here. Yeah, Nakobe Dean. If you look at this Eagles defense, there's been a ton of turnover. Starting at the top, you have a new defensive coordinator coming in, and Sean Desai replacing Jonathan Gannon. And a lot of turnover on the coaching staff because Gannon took some of those guys with him to Arizona. And you look at the spine of that defense. You have 2 defensive tackles, 2 linebackers, 2 safeties in that spine. 6 starters there, 5 of them are new. And so you're going to need some sort of stabilizing force in the middle of that defense. And I think that's going to be Nakobe Dean, right? He didn't play much last year as a rookie, but now he's going to get the chance to start because there are 2 departed starters there. And at Georgia, he entered that program as a 5-star recruit. He was there for 3 seasons, totally balled out there. When he left, he was a unanimous All-American, won the Butkus Award. I think he's probably, even as a rookie, no worse than average as a middle linebacker. And there's potential upside there for him just to be awesome right away, because he did spend basically that year redshirting, picking up the system. He's strong against the run and in coverage. He was expected to go on the borderline of round 1, round 2, fell to round 3 because of, size concerns, some injury concerns. But man, I think he was an outright steal for the Eagles. So I think this is a year where he just absolutely breaks out and ensures that defense has strong continuity from last year to this year.
All right, very good. 13 tackles in 17 games last year for Dean. As Friedman mentioned, didn't get any starts, but a chance for him to unleash. Raybon, as Friedman eloquently said, you are all skill position for this particular episode, and you're going to the running back position. Well, running backs matter to us here at the Action Network podcast. We don't have a group text going about them, but one that could break out, sort of an under-the-radar guy, is in Minnesota.
Okay, first of all, I feel like I'm getting painted badly usually when I break down games, I'm talking about all kind of random offensive linemen and whatnot. But our producer of the show just said, "Hey, we need 5 breakout candidates." When you hear that, what do you think? You think fantasy, right? So I had no idea this wasn't a fantasy podcast. So I'm still going with my guys, but don't try to paint me into a corner here.
You paint everyone else into a corner on every show you go into. So why don't you give us the running back that you think is going to break out? Very
fair. I'm going with Alexander Mattison. And this is because we're talking about guys that are going to see a drastic increase in performance. And when you have a running back, the first thing you need to do is get carries. And whether it's by default or because he's playing better, Alexander Mattison is going to get carries this year. The Vikings moved on from Dalvin Cook. And behind Mattison, you got Dwayne McBride, you got Kene Nwangu, who's more of a special teamer, return specialist kind of guy, and you got Ty Chandler, who is another guy who played mostly on special teams last year, second-year guy, and McBride is a rookie, and they're already saying it's, this has been a tough offense to kind of pick up in camp, so he's probably still behind those other two guys. So the way I'm looking at it now is like Dalvin Cook played more than expected last year in Kevin O'Connell's system. Mattison kind of cleaned it up. This year, I think it's going to just be kind of, they got Mattison on a pretty cheap deal. So I think, these next 2 years, at least for this one, they're going to run him into the ground, if by choice or because he plays well. And he actually has played well in Dalvin Cook's absence. He's put up big fantasy numbers. Now, on this Viking team, they should, defenses should have to respect the passing game with Jefferson, Hawkinson, Jordan Addison. But what I see from the Vikings this year is that I think their run game is going to be better because they just reinvested and gave a contract to CJ Ham. They gave a big contract to Josh Oliver, who is going to be their number 2 tight end, one of the best blocking tight ends in the league. So they're going to be able to kind of force defenses, I think, a little more to come out and defend, those, 2-2 personnel, those 1-2 personnel type looks, where last year they were more of a straight up, just 1-1, 3 receivers, 1 back type of team. So because I think they're going to be a little more versatile in their formations with some good blockers at the skill positions this year, I think that's going to improve the efficiency of their running game. So I think Mattison will be in for a pretty big season.
Alexander Mattison at FanDuel, his season total rushing yards prop is at 900.5.
Yeah, I would probably take him to go over that, but I wouldn't because running backs never stay healthy. So never bet on a running back over, ever. Okay. Oh, always under.
Minus 112 on the over and the under for Mattison.
That's big difference. Minus 110, minus 112. That was a useless piece of information, Glash. I'm disappointed in you.
Friedman, breakout candidate number 3, please.
Yeah, I just want to echo 2 things. One, echo Raybon's disappointment in you, really. But then the second thing, more importantly, with Raybon 100% on Alexander Mattison. Dude balled out in his 6 starts in place of Dalvin Cook when he was injured. 19.5 carries, 4.5 targets, absolutely 100% with Raybon on that. The running back I'm looking at here, and by the way, so there's been all of this, conversation over the past month or so over the valuation of running backs. Josh Jacobs doesn't want to play for the franchise tag. He might miss camp. He might miss some games. He might report, but then be out of football shape. And running backs suffer injuries anyway. So all that is pointing me to Raiders running back Zamir White, who I think could end up getting some usage. He's a guy who was a rookie last year, came in the 4th round, but he has phenomenal recruitment pedigree. He was the number 1 running back in the 2018 recruitment class. He has like an Adrian Peterson-esque physical profile, ran a 4.4 second 40-yard dash at 6 feet, 214 pounds. So he's like a big guy. The problem is that he has 2 repaired ACL tears, which like long-term, that might inhibit his ability to stick in the league. But in the short term, if Josh Jacobs isn't out there, like Zamir White's going to get some run because he really is the only guy in that Raiders backfield other than Jacobs, who's like built like a real lead back. So he did almost nothing last year, but this is basically just a way of saying like, I think that Jacobs, either because he doesn't report to camp or he's a running back, he gets injured, or because he was used so much last year, he had a league high 393 touches last year. Because of something, we end up seeing Zamir White get much more run than people would anticipate. And given his pedigree and what he did at Georgia, I think he could actually do pretty well. So it's a situation where at the end of the year, White will have like 1,000 yards from scrimmage, and that's great for him. But it will also be like a killer for the running backs matter crowd, because it'll be like, well, like people thought Josh Jacobs was important for the Raiders, and it turns out maybe he wasn't.
And the rest of their room, Amir Abdullah is just a guy who might get a couple targets in the passing game. He's a mini bull moose. And then Brandon Bolden is just there to continue the Patriot way for Josh McDaniels in Las Vegas. So unless one of those guys, unless White goes down, maybe Brandon Bolden, who had some weird breakout games with the Patriots a few years ago, maybe he is utilized.
No.
I'm leaning with no, Raybon.
It would probably just be Britton Brown or something. No, seriously, I just think Bolden is like your stereotypical classic Belichick special team or Belichick McDaniel. Like he's going to stick on the roster. He might not play an offensive snap all year. Tywan Jones special.
Okay, another skill guy from Raybon, this time at the receiver position. Your 3rd breakout candidate, Raybon.
Let's go Drake London. He has all the he has the first round draft pedigree, and he put up a quiet 866 yards, 72 catches, 4 touchdowns on a pretty bad passing offense. I don't see how the Falcons passing offense will be any worse this year than it was last year with 15 games of Mariota and 2 games, or was it? Yeah, 13 to 15 games of Mariota, a couple of games of Ritter as a rookie. I think the passing game will be better. The O-line's great. And I think Bijan's only going to make this offense tougher to defend. And we saw, the minute London comes in, Kyle Pitts was coming off essentially 1,000-yard rookie year, and he looked invisible once London came in. I know a lot of it, Pitts was getting targets that were uncatchable at points, but London, he was playing with the same quarterbacks, and he was, a lot more productive even before Pitts went down. So I think that London is going to continue to ascend. I wouldn't be surprised if he puts up a 1,000-yard season this year. And it's kind of like clockwork. Like most of these highly drafted receivers now, it used to be year 3. A lot of times now we're seeing it happen in year 2, where these guys really take the biggest leaps because you're just getting so much playing time in year 1 these days, and teams are passing so much more. So, I think London is a guy, because he's on the Falcons offense, he's getting a little bit forgotten. I know he's kind of floating in those mid-20s in fantasy rankings, but I think this guy showed he was a lot better than maybe people think for a guy like that in this kind of offense. So I'm going with Drake London to have a 1,000-yard season this year.
All right, and his total at FanDuel is 800.5 receiving yards for 2023. Quickly, what are your thoughts on Ritter as the quarterback?
I don't know if he holds the job all year. I think the jury's still out on him. I don't think he has a super high ceiling. I think he can be better than Mariota was last year. And he could still move around a little bit. So in terms of the fantasy guys' numbers, I think it'll be a little better. But in terms of like real life, just how much of an improvement is he? I think he's a slight improvement, but I think Heineke is they're kind of in the same boat. Like they're both never going to be guys I think you ever rely on long term. But there's a lot of good pieces on this offense. And Arthur Smith has done less but more. Let's not forget, Arthur Smith is the one who, when Ryan Tannehill comes in, he transformed his Titans offense that was an afterthought to everyone into one of the best in the league. So I wouldn't be surprised to see good numbers out of the guys in this offense, and that could include Ritter.
All right, very good. Let's go on to our 4th. We're doing 5 breakout candidates from both Friedman and Raybon. Our 4th Friedman is a guy who I don't think many expected to go to this team early in the draft when it took place earlier in the calendar year, and he's in Seattle.
So I'm looking at Seahawks cornerback Riq Woolen. And I think this defense for the Seahawks is going to be better than it was last year. And I think he could be the face of that improvement. Woolen was a 2020 5th rounder. He was inconsistent in college, in part because he transitioned from wide receiver to cornerback, sort of like Richard Sherman did years before when he was at Stanford. And, he was a little uneven in college because he was behind the developmental curve. But Woolen blew up at the combine, 6'4", 205 pounds. So built like a wide receiver, and has unreal speed, 4.26 second 40-yard dash. So he has the size to man up with any wide receiver in the league. And he's got the speed to stick with basically everyone except Tyreek Hill. And then he absolutely balled out as a rookie with a league high 6 interceptions on the way to the Pro Bowl. So it's, a little bit hard to say a guy who made the Pro Bowl last year breaks out this year, but he's still a little bit under the radar. In part because, one, you had Sauce Gardner absolutely dominating last year and taking a lot of the spotlight as the rookie cornerback who broke out. And then it was still on a defense that wasn't all that good. And, as Woolen moves into his 2nd season, that defense improves, maybe that offense improves, and all of a sudden people are paying much more attention to the Seattle Seahawks. You have this big, physical, freakishly athletic cornerback who's just shutting down everybody. I think he could end up being an all-pro kind of player this year. So I don't want to give too much hype to a guy who was a day 3 player just a year ago, but I mean, we could be looking at the next Legion of Boom type of player in Seattle with this guy, because the ceiling is unreal with him, both in terms of his ball productions last year, but then the physical ability is unreal.
Yeah, and my apologies. He's a compliment to Devin Witherspoon, who they took early in the draft. That's what I was getting at. But Woolen's a guy that I guess that fits the narrative that we're discussing here as far as under the radar. Witherspoon will get a lot of attention from a media perspective because of being such a high pick. But how do Woolen and Witherspoon fit together? Is that fit your Legion of Boom potential possibly?
Yeah, I mean, Witherspoon, I think he's got that inside outside versatility, whereas like Woolen is purely, I think, like a perimeter cornerback. Like I don't think he would be so great sticking with like your shifty middle of the field receivers. But if there's a team that has a really dominant slot man, you could put Witherspoon on him in the slot and he could shut that guy down. So yeah, I think they're like very complementary pieces to each other. And I think like if Witherspoon is as good as everyone thinks he will be, or is as good as he should be as the number 5 pick, then those two guys could be like a devastating corner tandem for years.
Love it. Okay, Raybon, you're going back to another wide receiver that might be a breakout candidate for 2023.
Yeah, and by the way, I love Friedman's call on Woolen. I think he's one of the best corners in the league already. So yeah, if you don't know who this is, he's gonna ball out this year. But I got to go with Jahan Dotson, the wide receiver for the Washington Commanders, entering his second year. This is a guy who a lot of people were kind of surprised when he went as high as he did. He went 16th in the draft last year out of Penn State. But I love his speed. He ran a 4.43. A 40-yard dash, and he already has showed a nose for the end zone. But when you look at how he kind of progresses the year went on, over his last 5 games, he averaged 4.2 catches, 69 yards per game, and 0.6 touchdowns per game. And that was up from just 26 yards a game on a couple of catches over his first 7 games of his rookie year. So I like how he came on, and I like how now we have a new offensive coordinator here in Washington who, and Eric Bieniemy, who I think, might open things up a little more. You got Sam Howell that, will throw downfield. And remember, all this production for Dotson came with Terry McLaurin in the lineup. It's not like McLaurin was out in and out of the lineup or anything like that. So with the second-year leap that guys usually take, I think Dotson's going to kind of establish himself as a great complementary receiver to McLaurin. There's even a chance that Dotson ends up usurping him this year. I mean, he was a higher pick than McLaurin, and I think Terry had a better rookie year, but the numbers over the last 5 games for Dotson were McLaurin-like. So I really think Dotson, and especially because also I don't think Washington's going to be able to run nearly as much as they did last year. Last year, for some reason, they weren't a really good team, but they were kind of in games due to the schedule or whatever not, and they were able to run a ton. This year, I think they're going to have to be a little more pass-heavy because I do think they're one of the weaker teams. And they play in a pretty tough division in that NFC East. So I'm expecting Jahan Dotson to put up numbers more resembling the way he closed the season than the way he opened it.
Mm-hmm. And I would imagine they want to see if they have something in Sam Howell too.
Yeah.
You might as well at this point. It's a later round pick. I realize that. But why, if you're going to go back into the draft the following year, see what you got and try to find what you have at that position. And like you said, Dotson did come on at the end of last year, had at least 6 targets in 4 of those final games, 3 touchdowns. A couple against the Giants and 1 against the San Francisco 49ers. Final breakout candidate, and Friedman's also going to give a couple of quick hitters before we go, just some quick one-liners on some guys to possibly look out for. Who is your final, who made the top 5, Friedman?
Yeah, I'm looking at left tackle Broderick Jones for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The offensive line used to be great for the Steelers. It was like an institution there. And then for a couple of years, it was really bad. And now it's been rebuilt through free agency, a little bit through the draft over the past couple of seasons. And I think it will be markedly better this year. And a big part of that, I think, is Broderick Jones. Enters the league this year. He's a first-round rookie. In college, he was a 5-star recruit, started 19 games at left tackle at Georgia for 2 championship-winning teams. He's got a fantastic athletic profile, massive, 6'5", 311 pounds, and runs under a 5-second 40, which, for any guy to do that at that size just speaks to the athleticism that he has. He's a little bit raw with his technique, but he feels like the kind of guy who could scale up really quickly just through physical dominance. So I don't think he'll be like rookie year Rashawn Slater, but I think he has the upside to be a top 8 left tackle pretty quickly. And that could be really important for the running game. They've been inefficient in the running game there. And that could also be really big for the development of second-year quarterback Kenny Pickett. So if the Steelers are able to improve significantly based on what they did last year, I think Broderick Jones is going to be a pretty big part of it.
Pro Football Focus, they have their offensive line rankings that came out shortly right before training camp started, and the Steelers have moved up the boards. They're now in the top half of the league, and Jones is a highlight of that. And Raybon, we're going to stay with the Pittsburgh Steelers. You've got another skill guy for Pittsburgh that could be poised for a great year if that O-line does its job. Pickett takes the next step at quarterback.
Right, and that's George Pickens, second-year receiver for the Steelers. And listen, the offensive line improvement would be big for a guy like Pickens because he only finished 81 yards behind Deontay Johnson as a rookie in terms of their receiving yardage. And that was on catching, more than 30 fewer balls because he's averaging over 15 yards a catch. Johnson's averaging about 10. So, if you watch Pickens play, you see the talent, contested catches, things along the sideline, things like that. But I think, Pickett and whoever the quarterback would be would just need time to get him the ball. And I think they're going to have more of that this year. Pickett going into his second year, there should be a connection there. So, I wouldn't be surprised if there's another situation where, Deontay's kind of been a staple as the receiving leader these last few years for the Steelers. And he had over 60 more targets than Pickens. So again, as these guys go to first to second year, they usually figure out how to get open more. They're better off the line. They know the playbook better, so they're playing faster. So I think Pickens is going to be able to command a larger share of the targets per route that he runs. And so I think I would not be surprised at all if you see Pickens overtake Johnson in at least yardage as soon as this year. And I think he's the better playmaker. I think he's the better guy when you're in the red zone, as we've seen last year with Deontay scoring no touchdowns. And I think he's the better guy deep down the field. So, any improvement from Pickett, any improvement from that O-line, I think just helps the guy who already had a pretty solid rookie season in George Pickens with 52, 801, and 4 scores.
And he has been opening eyes with some of his highlight reel catches during camp. So Pickens, the upside is certainly there as a high-end pick, and we know how they churn out receivers in Pittsburgh. They do a pretty good job of that over the years. You each have a couple more that you want to give out, just some quick hitters, and then we'll get out of here. So Friedman, you got a couple more you'd like to give out.
Yeah, so one is Chiefs rookie wide receiver Rashee Rice, a second-round guy. He's got decent size, good enough athleticism, was productive in college. Juju Smith-Schuster, who he's, I think, kind of replacing. He can play inside. He can play outside. I'm kind of skeptical about a lot of the other wide receivers that they have in Kansas City. So I think sooner rather than later, he's going to get a shot to produce. And then Bills wide receiver Gabe Davis, who it feels like people have been hyping forever now. And so he's sort of like in a post-hype bounce back scenario, but he plays almost every snap. He's a perimeter field stretcher. He's attached to a really great quarterback. He's been productive through his career, and he's still young. He's still just 24 years old. So I think he has untapped potential. And then one more here, Broncos number 2 quarterback, Jarrett Stidham. This is essentially a bet that Russell Wilson is washed and that head coach Sean Payton eventually turns to Stidham, who played well in relief last year, Derek Carr, and that Payton, we've seen him be productive with other quarterbacks besides Drew Brees. Maybe he can also make Jarrett Stidham look pretty good. So it wouldn't surprise me if at the end of the year, Stidham gets 5 starts and it's like, oh, hey, wait a minute. That guy went 4-1 and actually looked like a legit NFL quarterback.
Wow. Okay. Well, if that's the case, though, who knows how the Broncos look offensively throughout the course of the year if they have to go to Stidham in that case. And I like the call on Gabe Davis. A lot of mysterious, murky stuff going on with Steph Diggs. Maybe it's Davis's turn to emerge. And he had games last year. He was excellent, no question. But more consistency, I think, is what you're getting at. Raybon, got a couple more before we go. Breakout candidates. Yeah,
and we'll stay on the Bills. So I think one of the reasons that we have heard those kind of things from Stephon Diggs is because the Bills, when he got to camp, he found out that the Bills were trying to run a lot more 2 tight end sets this year. And that's because they want to make the defense kind of decide whether to keep a third corner on the field or an extra linebacker. And if you have a third corner on the field, then they're going to run at you. If you have an extra linebacker, then Dalton Kincaid, who I think could break out this year. Usually tight ends, they don't do much their rookie year, but I think they're going to kind of treat Kincaid almost like a slot receiver, almost like what they've been missing since Cole Beasley hasn't, really been there. So I think Kincaid's going to be on the field a lot. He may even run more routes than a guy like Dawson Knox, who's still going to be there for his blocking, but I think they're going to use Kincaid as a real weapon, red zone, things like that. So I think you're going to see a lot of him right off the bat in year one. Another tight end who the hype train has is dying with him, but I still think he's very talented and could still surprise people. And that's Chig Okonkwo in Tennessee. You know, I know Vrabel had the quotes about his blocking, but I also know that, you know, Tennessee, when you look at their depth chart at tight end, there's not really much there. And they have talked about, you know, they don't want to have to bring a bunch of different guys in and off the field this year. So I think they're going to kind of fight through it with Okonkwo, because he has so much talent as a receiver. He was targeted on over 25% of his routes as a rookie. He was one of the most explosive tight ends in terms of yards after the catch, you know, yards per catch, all of those things. So I think he's going to get a chance to shine. He's always going to be single covered, because now you got Hopkins in addition to Burks, who also might be in for a little bit of a mini breakout. And the final one is more of like a shot in the dark, long shot. But Jalen Nailor, I think, is really interesting on Minnesota, because everyone's going to kind of assume that, you know, it's going to be Addison as that third guy, or KJ Osborne. But Nailor has been a guy that, you know, he's been flashing some things since he's gotten to Minnesota. And he was targeted on over 30% of his routes in a small sample last year. I think it was 13 of his 31 pass routes. And, you know, he's been kind of lighting up camp and running with the ones a lot in camp. So, you know, if anything happens with Addison, or, you know, they decide Osborne is just kind of a replacement level talent, I think Nailor could, you know, end up in that starting lineup for Minnesota. And we saw how many pass attempts they had to go around last year. I think they were third in the league in pass attempts. So he's kind of an under the radar guy, similar to KJ Osborne a couple years ago, when you're like, okay, somebody's going to have to catch the ball for Minnesota besides, you know, Jefferson, and at that time it was Steven. So I think Nailor is a guy that I'm watching. I think could put up a lot better numbers than people think.
Someone's got to fill that Adam Thielen void this coming year for the Minnesota Vikings. Maybe it is by committee under Kevin O'Connell running that offense with Kirk Cousins. Chris Raybon, great work as always. You can catch Raybon here on the Action Network podcast throughout the course of the season. And thank you very much to Matthew Friedman, our Action Network alum. He's a friend of the pod and our NFL expert over at Fantasy Life. Matthew Friedman, thanks for coming by.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Really fun to talk.
Okay, and that concludes our NFL Breakout Candidates episode here on the Action Network podcast. We are presented by FanDuel. My name is Brendan Glasheen. Thank you all for tuning in. We look forward to having more NFL content as the season nears here on the Action Network podcast.